Today we're going to be taking a look at Underwater Cities. This is a 1 to 4 player network building hand management city building game, where you take the role of underwater nation builders. The Earth is overpopulated, and underwater nations are the only option for human expansion. So you will be building cities, expanding your network through tunnels, connecting to metropolises, constructing buildings, and using experts to complete tasks trying to become the most successful underwater nation builder. How do you become the most successful underwater nation builder and win the game? By having the most points at the end of 10 rounds. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's take a look at the components, setup, and how gameplay works in Underwater Cities. Now let's take a look at the components. You have the double-sided main game board. One side is for 3 and 4 players, and the other side is for 1 and 2 players. Double-sided player boards. In the bottom right corner, 1 through 4 is your standard player boards, and on the backs, 5 through 8, are your asymmetric player boards. Era cards, Era 1, Era 2, and Era 3. On these cards, in the top left is the timing of the card, across the top is the effect of the card, and a description of the effect is on the bottom. 1, 2, and 3 credit special cards, government contract cards, which is a variant for the game, era marker, and each player color. You have markers, action tiles, personal assistant card, and final scoring cards. Player info cards. These give you the cost for constructing buildings, tunnels, and cities, as well as what they give you during the production phase. Domes or cities. You have symbiotic purple or red, non-symbiotic white, and there's a promo that comes with the game that is green. Buildings, which are your small discs. The green buildings are your farms, which will produce kelp. The yellow are your plants, which produce credits. And the gray are your labs, which produce science. Double-sided tunnel tiles. Resource tokens. You have credits in 1, 5, and 10. Biomatter in 1 and 3. Kelp in 1 and 3. Steel plast in 1 and 3. And science in 1 and 3. Brown metropolis tiles, blue metropolis tiles, action cloning tile, multiplier tiles, and finally, your rulebook. Now let's take a look at the setup. We're going to be setting this up for a 3-player game, which takes 8 steps. Step 1, place the main board. You will place the main board in the center of the play area using the side of the main board based on the number of players. One side of the board is for 1 and 2 players, and the other side is for 3 and 4. Step 2, create supply pools. Next to the main board and within reach of all the players, you will place credits, tunnels, buildings, resources, and cities. When placing your cities, you will place all of the non-symbiotic or white domes, and you will place a number of symbiotic based on the number of players. In a 4-player game, you will place all of them out. In a 3-player game, you will only place 10 out. And then in a 2-player game, you will only use 7. Step 3, separate, shuffle, and place era decks. Separate the era decks into Era 1, Era 2, and Era 3 based on the back of the cards. Shuffle each stack, and then place the Era 1 on top of the main board. Then you will place Era 2 and Era 3 stacks next to the main board. Step 4, place the era marker. Place the era marker on the starting space on the era track. So looking at the track, rounds 1 through 4, you're going to be using Era 1 cards. Rounds 5 through 7, you're going to be using Era 2 cards. And rounds 8 through 10, you're going to be using Era 3 cards. Step 5, special cards. Separate, shuffle, place, and draw special cards. You'll separate the special cards into 2 decks. A 1 and 2 credit deck, and then a 3 credit deck. This indicates the cost of the card, which is in the top left of the card. Shuffle each stack, place the 1 and 2 credit deck in the center of the main board, and flip over the top card. And then for the 3 credit deck, you will draw the top 6 and place them on the main board and return the remaining to the box. Step 6, choose a color and get player components. Each player will choose a color and get the corresponding markers, action tiles, personal assistant card, and final scoring card. Also, players will get a player board, player info card, 1 kelp, 1 steel plast, 1 science, 2 credits, 1 random brown metropolis tile, 2 random blue Metropolis tiles, and 1 non-symbiotic city. Keep in mind that the player boards are two-sided, sides 1 through 4 are the same, and sides 5 through 8 are asymmetric. So for your first game, they suggest you use sides 1 through 4. Step 7. Place player components. Players will place the player board in the middle of their player area. Place your non-symbiotic city in the bottom right circle on your player board, your brown Metropolis tile in the top left hex on your player board, the blue Metropolis tiles in the top right and bottom left hexes on your player board, a marker on 0 on the score track, action tiles, resources, and cards next to your player board. Place 2 markers on the turn order and federation track. When placing these markers, the player who is first in turn order will be below the federation track. Second in turn order would be on space 4 on the federation track, and third in turn order will be on space 3 on the federation track and gain 1 credit. And if we're playing a 4-player game, the player who would be 4th would place on 2 on the federation track and gain 1 credit and 1 steel plast. Step 8. Get your starting hand. Each player will get 6 Era 1 cards, and then choose 3 to keep and 3 to discard. Keep in mind that if it's your first game, it is suggested that you keep 1 of each color. Now let's take a look at the gameplay. A game consists of 10 rounds, with a production phase after rounds 4, 7, and 10. A round. A round consists of at most 3 phases: player turns, end of round, and production. Now let's take a look at each in detail. Player turns phase. During this phase, each player will take 3 player turns. A player's turn is where you will choose an action slot and play a card from your hand. A player's turn is carried out in 4 steps. Step 1. Choose an action slot. You'll place your action tile on an available action slot on the main board. This indicates the job that you want done. The action slots allow you to build if you see a down arrow, gain resources if you see a resource depicted, gain cards if you see blank rectangles, perform the action on one of your action cards if you see an A in a rectangle, gain a special card if you see an S in a rectangle, upgrade a building or tunnel if you see an up arrow above buildings and tunnels, and go up the Federation track if you see a world icon. Step 2. Play a card. You'll play a card from your hand. If it matches the action slot color, you will get to claim the card or perform the effects. If not, the card is discarded immediately. This is to indicate the personnel you are choosing to carry out the job you want done. So the matching personnel would be an expert to carry out that job. The color of the card is in the top bar of the card. Step 3. Perform the actions. During this step, you could perform the actions or effects from the action slot or your card in either order. Keep in mind that when carrying out the action slot or carrying out the card effects, you must resolve all of one before you go to the other. Now let's look at these actions and effects in detail, starting with your cards. The top left is the timing. If it has a lightning bolt, you would gain that benefit when carrying out the card effects. Then you would discard that card. If it has an infinity symbol and it matched your action slot, then you would place that card in your player area, claiming that card. This would give you an ongoing effect during your player turns. If it had an A in the top left corner and it matched your action slot, you would place that card in your player area as one of your action cards. You can have up to 4 action cards. And if you wanted another action card, you would have to discard one of your current action cards. These give you available actions when performing actions that have a card and an A. When you use these cards for their actions, they can be used once per era, so once you use them, you would turn them on their side, and then between eras, you would refresh them. Production cards. These have a gear in the top left corner, and these will produce resources or effects during the production phase. And then lastly, in-game scoring or the stopwatch. These will give you scoring benefits at the end of the game. Building action. These are the down arrows. When performing building actions, you would pay the cost listed on the player info card. When building cities, you can build a city adjacent to any existing city following the tunnel lines. You do not have to have a tunnel line connecting to the new city. Building tunnels. You can build a tunnel anywhere that would connect through your tunnels to your starting city. You do not have to have a city in between 2 of your tunnels. Constructing buildings. You may build in a solid circle around an existing city or a site where you could build a new city. The blue circles for buildings on your player board are considered expansion sites. These can only be built on using card effects. Special cards. When performing this action, you would gain one of the special cards to your hand, and these cards are played like normal cards. It would become a part of your hand and a part of your hand limit. The only difference is when playing these cards, you must pay the credits. If you were to discard a 1 or 2 credit special card without gaining the card's ability, you would place it under the deck. When discarding 1 or 2 credit cards after gaining their effect, or a 3 credit card, you would discard it out of the game. Keep in mind that biomatter can be traded for steelplast or kelp. Upgrading. These are the up arrows over the buildings and tunnels. Depending on the action, you would pay 1 science, or 1 science and the usual resource cost to upgrade a building or tunnel. To upgrade the tunnel, you would flip the tunnel over to show a point, and to upgrade buildings, you would stack a second building on top of an existing building of the same color. These would allow you to produce more during the production phase. Metropolises. You must connect via tunnels from your starting city to the metropolis to gain its abilities. Keep in mind that the brown metropolis will require 2 tunnels next to that metropolis. Once a player has carried out their action slot and possible card effects, we move to step 4, draw a card. So in this case, the first player is purple. So they placed their action tile, played their card since the action tile color and card matched, and then carried out the action slot first, gaining the resources. And since they matched the color with their card, they carried out the card's effects. The card effect was immediate because of the lightning bolt, and they were able to build a farm on an expansion site, paying the usual cost. Then we would go to the next player. And then player turns will continue until the end of the last player's third turn. Then we will move to phase 2, end of round. During this phase, you will perform 4 steps. Step 1, return the action tiles to each player. Step 2, update player order. This is based on your place on the Federation track. First on the Federation track will go first in player order. And if players are at the bottom of the Federation track, then you would use the last round's order. Step 3, move all discs on the Federation track below the track. And then step 4, advance the era marker. If the era or round marker is on the gear space, then we would move to phase 3, production. If it is not on the gear space, you would go on to the next round. Phase 3, production. The production phase is carried out in 7 steps. Step 1, all connected cities, tunnels, and buildings produce resources. These cities, tunnels, and buildings have to be connected to your starting city. The resources that you will produce is located on your player info card, based on the level of building and if it is connected to cities. Step 2, check production cards. These are the cards you've claimed with the gears icon in the top left corner. Step 3, feed cities. Each city will require 1 kelp. If you do not have kelp, you would pay in biomatter, and if you do not have that, you would pay in points. Step 4, refresh used action cards. Any action card that you've used and turned sideways would then refresh and be placed upright. Step 5, replace era cards. You would remove the era cards on the main board and then replace them with the next era's cards, which are to the right side of the board. Step 6, each player will draw 3 new era cards, and then from their hand, they will discard down to 3. And then step 7, advance the era marker. And then rounds will continue until the end of the production phase in round 10, and we would go into the final scoring. Final scoring takes 4 steps. Step 1, score your brown metropolis tile if it's connected to your starting city. Step 2, score in-game scoring cards. These are the cards that have the stopwatch in the top left corner. Step 3, score your network. During this step, you will score 2 points for a connected city with no buildings, 3 points for a connected city with 1 type of building, 4 points for a connected city with 2 types of buildings, and 6 points for a connected city with all 3 types of buildings. And then step 4, score your resources. You will sell all of your biomatter for 2 credits, and then you will buy 1 point for every 4 credits, kelp, science, or steelplast you spend. This can be done in any combination. When all the players have finished adding their score, the player with the most points is the most successful Underwater Nation builder and wins Underwater Cities.